Thank you for that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malina Villalobos, and I'm a student advocate and current City College of San Francisco student trustee. On behalf of the Downtown Associated Student Council and Office of Student Activities, I'm very excited to welcome you to our final Leadership Fireside Chat this semester. For those of who are not familiar with this leadership development program, the purpose of these leadership chats is to equip CCSF students and student leaders with a wealth of leadership insight, tips, and strategies. We hope you will have a better understanding of leadership in action from a diverse group of effective and seasoned leaders across various industries. Before we introduce today's speaker, Dr. Joshua Moon, I'd like to share a few details about the program. First, those who attend 7 of the 10 Fireside Chats during the academic year are eligible to receive a certificate of participation at a recognition event in the spring semester. Every session is open to all students, even if you decide not to participate in the certificate program part of the program, the certificate part of the program. And we're going to go ahead and insert the information in the chat. Since you have registered for today's session, thanks to Zoom, we have a record of your attendance. Nothing further is needed on your end to mark your participation. Next, please note that these sessions will be recorded. The links will be posted on CCSF Student Activities Office website for you to view later or to share with others so that they may benefit from this learning opportunity as well. And we're going ahead and share the website with you. And if you have any questions about this Leadership Fire Chat program and the certificate of participation, please email student activities at ccsflife@mel.ccsf.edu. I would also like to share a little bit regarding today's format. After these opening remarks, Geisce Ly, the Interim Vice Chancellor of Academic and Institutional Affairs, will interview today's speaker for about 50 minutes. If you have questions for Joshua, please enter them in the chat directly to Amy, who will be assisting with the questions and answer portion. At around 5 p.m., there will be a Q&A opportunity for Joshua to respond to your questions. During the last 10 minutes of our time together, we will invite you to share what you've learned today that will help you in your leadership development journey. I am now going to turn it over who is going to share about our leadership program.
Thank you, Student Trustee Malinali. So at this point, again, I just want to thank all of you for joining today's Leisure Fireside Chat. Again, I just want to thank Amy Coffey for doing a lot of the behind-the-scenes support. So thank you, Amy, very much for all that you've done for this program. I am now just thrilled to get to ask Joshua some questions. Again, I just want to share that even though you may have worked with some managers and leaders, some are good, right? And hopefully some of you will be very lucky enough to work for a great leader. In my lifetime, I have known a few great leaders, and Joshua is one of the few great leaders. I speak of him in that regard because he is amazing. We are just so delighted, so fortunate, so lucky to have Joshua today. And again, I'm just so delighted to be able to call Joshua a good friend. So Joshua, thank you for hanging out with me today and sharing your leadership wisdom.
Thank you, Geisce, for inviting me into y'all's community. Also, thank you, Taiman and to Malinali for the wonderful context, information, and introduction. So happy to be hanging out with y'all on this Friday afternoon. I know y'all are very close to a winter break and hopefully some celebration and fun and relaxation. So I am honored to be the final speaker for this series.
Yes, and again, I think you'll be so inspiring for all of us, and I'm going to be taking lots of notes. So without further ado, Joshua, certainly I love for the folks on the call to know more about you. So tell us more about yourself, your career path, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, okay, y'all, I talk a lot and, I'm from the South, but I do talk kind of fast. And so I'm going to try to slow it down. And so if I do start to talk too quickly and you need me to slow down and enunciate a little, please just put that in the chat or interrupt me. Totally okay with that. But as mentioned, Dr. Joshua Moon Johnson, Joshua is totally fine. I use he or they pronouns. I live actually in San Francisco, very close to the CCSF campus, but I'm coming to you today from my office at the College of San Mateo. so. And so with that, I am on Ramutesh Ohlone land and want to acknowledge that in the spaces that we're occupying, as all of our institutions of higher education pretty much are on occupied and stolen land due to genocide of our indigenous folks in our communities as well. So with that, naming it and making sure that our institutions and our organizations can do better there as well. How did I get to where I am? So most of my career, I guess I am an educator first and foremost, but beyond educating around in a formal sense, I probably think of myself more as a social justice educator, social justice activist, and I do that work within the context of education and higher education. And so that's always something that has been the lens of which I hope to approach my work with. And I'm honored that I get paid to do that kind of work. My official title in my full-time job is I'm the Vice President of Student Services at the College of San Mateo, which is another community college just about 30 minutes south of where y'all are. And I've spent probably, I've been working for a college campus for 22 years now. And beyond that, so that's my normal full-time job. I have a lot of side hustles, I guess you would say too, or part-time jobs, just because I'm a busybody and I like to kind of do things. I also am a managing partner for PMJ Consulting, which is an equity and social justice consulting firm, and mostly consulting for nonprofits, educational organizations, and some corporate for-profit institutions. And then I have my own kind of corporate office for me as a speaker, trainer, consultant. And so I regularly get to travel around the country and to speak and to train, mostly around equity and social justice and LGBTQ advocacy types of work with that as well. I think that those are all my normal jobs that I do. And I love the work that I do. I think people have always said, you're always doing so much, you're always so busy, you're going to get burnt out. And really, since I was probably about 18, I've been doing this kind of level of multiple jobs, multiple programs in school, and I haven't got burnt out yet. And I think it's because I love the work that I do. And it's been awesome that I get paid to do this work. As far as leadership, and I think about how I moved into being a senior leader at a college, I had kind of always been that little overly involved student, even in high school. I did homeschool until I was in the 9th grade, and then I went to a public high school. And realistically, I have multiple marginalized identities that don't naturally fit into what society says is mainstream. So I definitely struggled to connect with people socially. However, in very formalized settings like student clubs or athletic teams, Bible studies, I can connect really well with people in social environments. So I always gravitated towards being involved in clubs and then being an officer in those things too. And I kind of just continued that path. So I think about what I did as a college student, being in student government, residence life council, being a resident assistant, being in student like clubs and campus ministries. I kind of do the same thing now, except they pay me to do it. And so I'm still showing up. I did my undergrad and my master's degree in marketing. I really had no idea what I was going to study as I went off to college. I was the first one in my family to go off to university. Neither of my parents really were able or really there to guide my educational path. So I did a lot of research and tried to figure out ways to do it. And I think I was mostly successful, but there were definitely things that I didn't know. So I kind of fumbled through the college experience sometimes too. But I knew I liked something about working in education, a college or a university. I took a marketing class my sophomore year and I thought, this seems fun. I think I like marketing. I like stuff and whatever. I'm going to be a marketing professor is what I said. I started to tell all my faculty this. For those of you who are students, tell your faculty that you want to be a professor and they will always give you bonus points. Because they're like, what? You want to be an educator? Like, I want to be just like you. It's flattery gets you far in life, just so you know. But I really did. I knew I wanted to work at a college or university, but I didn't know what that meant. And from my mind, if you worked at a college, you were a professor. That's the only thing I kind of knew. So I went and got my master's in marketing. And while I was doing that, I worked for the university and I supervised the RA. So I did some student programming, some student conduct, student council kind of stuff. And I really liked it. And I, at that point, was like, okay. And my boss was getting his PhD in higher education. I was like, what is that? What are you going to do with that? He's like, oh, I'll be like a dean of students. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, you can work at a college and you don't have to be a faculty. And he's like, yeah, you're an administrator. I was like, I think I like that better. You just get to know students in a different way. I've always taught a little bit and done a little bit of research, but most of what I have been done has been as a staffer and an administrator. So I went and I got my dream job that I thought was my dream job when I was finishing my master's as a fashion buyer at Saks Corporate. And I did it for about 6 months and thought, this is kind of fun and enjoyable, marketing $500 pairs of shoes. But realistically, it was kind of a job and it was a hobby. But I was like, I don't know if this is really connected to my purpose in life. I don't know at 22 if I'm going to do this for the next 50 years and feel like that this is what I was put on this earth to do. So after about 6 months, I started to apply for jobs at universities. I went down this path of getting a master's in student affairs and diversity, working in residence life and career services, then getting a job as an assistant director of marketing for higher education. So those of you who are like, I'm kind of between this field or this field, I found a way to do marketing for student affairs, which I also had a master's in marketing and a master's in student affairs. Had no idea that that was a job or a career path, and loved it. I did marketing for Northern Illinois University for about 4 years. While I was there, I did my doctorate in adult and higher education and LGBT studies. And again, I didn't know what adult education was. I didn't know LGBT studies was a field, kind of just fell into it because I was passionate around trying to change our institutions that I thought were problematic. And then that led to a career path. So the first job I got after finishing my doctorate was as the director of the LGBT Center at UC Santa Barbara. And then I continued that path to advocate for marginalized folks within higher education. At my last institution, I was the Dean of Equity Program. So really advocating broadly for BIPOC students, English language learners, international students, undocumented DACA, mixed status family students, students facing basic needs challenges, as well as LGBTQ plus students, formerly incarcerated students, and many other folks who realistically our higher education systems in this country were not built or designed for many of folks from this background. Looking at who's on this call, most of us, these institutions were not created for us. And so I've remained a part of educational systems, even though I highly critique them. My goal is that I can hopefully make it better for other students, faculty, staff, and administrators, so our institutions can truly be social justice focused. And so I moved into my new role as the vice president in August, finishing up my first semester, and it's been a wonderful journey so far. Still able to consult, write, speak, and engage with cool people like y'all. And so, yeah, I think I'm probably halfway through my career in some way, but realistically, I will do this kind of work, social justice advocacy and education until I die, probably. So that's where I am now.
Well, I just want to let the audience know that because Joshua is so well regarded, the ACCA, board invited Joshua to be our ACCA conference keynote speaker. So Joshua is going to be a keynote speaker in February at this ACCA conference. So again, it's just another example of Joshua is just so amazing that it's so easy to ask Joshua because he is simply the best person out there to really talk about his advocacy work. So Joshua, let's go back to Santa Barbara. You did something that's very unique. You previously hosted a weekly public affairs radio talk show on KCSB called Check Yourself. So tell us more about this experience on how you critically examine media and popular culture through social justice lens.
It's very funny. I knew the manager at the radio station, and they were looking for more people to host public affairs shows, which, I've always had kind of this, I think most people don't like their voice. I think that's a universal thing, I believe. I definitely have always not enjoyed my voice for a number of reasons. I had a lot of speech issues as a kid that I knew I had to struggle through, challenges, kind of public speaking. And then I also have kind of what some people call like a gay voice. So this like the femininity that's expressed through a voice that many people have, mocked, made fun of, used to invoke violence on folks. And so there was already that kind of level of insecurity. So I never thought I would do anything on radio because of that. So I did it, whatever. I loved it. It was fun. The other kind of connection is too, I grew up in this interesting environment where both of my parents are evangelical Pentecostal ministers. We didn't watch TV in our house. We didn't have cable. I think we had two channels most of my life, PBS and the Trinity Broadcasting Network, which is the evangelical TV channel. So we weren't allowed to really watch TV. If we were feeling like real bad, we would sneak and watch like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and that was bad TV. But as I kind of got a little bit older and found access to other types of media, when I went to college was like the first time I had MTV. So there was always this, like, I really enjoyed media, but also it was kind of forbidden. And then the other time when I found access to it, I really like loved it in some ways too. But with that, even though I grew up in this environment that I question a lot of things, one thing that's so beautiful that my parents taught me is to critique aspects of society. So we critique the media, because it socializes you in ways that my parents didn't agree with. And then we also did homeschool because my parents didn't trust the education system, mainly because they didn't want us to learn about sex or evolution. But the idea of critiquing education systems, critiquing media became part of who I was and how I operated in this world. Turns out they taught me so well it backfired and I critiqued them. So I had this kind of idea of like, I really liked media, but I also, as I grew in my understanding of social justice theory, feminist theory, critical race theory, queer theory, I recognized that media also is highly problematic in the way it depicted, BIPOC folks, queer and trans folks, women, many other folks as with that too. But at the same time, I really enjoy watching TV. And this was towards the end of my doctoral program. I was trying to figure out like, I'm starting to do other research outside of my doc program. I do want to watch TV, but I feel guilty every time I watch TV because I felt like I should be productive doing other things. So one winter break, I decided I was going to do this side research project around critically analyzing media. And this was kind of a spin-off of my dissertation. So my dissertation, I interviewed LGBTQ students who were also Christian. And with that, a lot of the things they talked about were, I watched this show and I felt like they were negatively depicting Christian folks or LGBTQ folks, or I never saw Christian folks who were also LGBTQ. So there was this idea of socialization of how they saw themselves and the negative impact it had on them. And then on the other side of that, when I asked, like, how did you find healing and hope and survival? A number of them said, like, I watched this documentary and it really critically analyzed, religion and sexuality. And that was empowering to me. So I knew that media is such a powerful force for specifically how young adults understand, view themselves, learn about themselves, and learn about others. So I was like, I really want to watch a lot of TV this winter break, but I'm going to do it as a research study. So I researched and I watched all the episodes of the top 10 current TV shows that college students were watching. And I used kind of this rubric and critical lens, and then, wrote articles, did presentations kind of around the country on it. And one of my friends was like, you should do a public affairs shows around. And I was like, what? Why? I was like, okay, I'll do it. So each week I would host a show on Friday mornings where I would run my mouth about a current TV show, a music song, and a music video. And being like, okay, do you know what happened on this show this week? Blah, blah, blah. I love this, but it was awful how they depicted like specifically like Black people in this show, and blah, blah, blah. So that's what I did. I did that for like a year. I think there's like 40 episodes of me running my mouth around different music, media, TVs, movies, with that as well. I had a lot of fun with it, but it was also a lot of work to do all that research and preparation for it with it too. And then because of that, Brooks Institute, which was a photography school in Santa Barbara, was looking for a pop culture faculty member. And then I started teaching the local pop culture and social justice class at Brooks Institute, which I taught that class for about 3 years until I moved out of Santa Barbara.
Wow. So for the folks on the call, Joshua has done a little bit of almost everything. So this is just amazing that you have such a, such a diverse, scope of experiences. So you've taught, and again, on this next topic, you taught at 4 very different institutions, and certainly that has influenced your understanding of identity and conflict. And I think this is where you eventually wrote a book, right? And you now have 3 books, and we'll get to the books in just a moment. So how has your teaching experience influenced how you how the advocacy work you took on, and then that of course became your passion?
Yeah, I've always kind of enjoyed teaching. I think I just get bored doing anything full time. And so I think the nice thing around, especially being a senior administrator, for me, it's critical to understand the full aspect of the student experience, because being in student affairs or student services, you see one part of a student's life. However, if you don't see the classroom side of it, I feel like we're pretty limited in how we make decisions. And so the higher up that I've gone in an administrative organizational chart, I wanted to make sure that I was making decisions that truly centered students and the student experience. So I've always tried to stay active in the classroom, just to have that type of relationship and connections with students too. And so to me, I find a lot of value in engaging with students in a classroom environment, especially the types of classes that I've taught have often been very dialogue based. And so we aren't just lecturing and doing homework and turning it in. It's often very engaged in those conversations. And so I think some of the things that I've learned by engaging with students in a classroom environment definitely have informed how I lead institutions. And so that's something that I always try to do and continue to do, to understand all of what a student experience is, and how I can be someone of influence to really shape an institution to support them.
So Joshua, I want to definitely get to asking you questions about what led you to write your first book. So for the folks on the call, Joshua is an author of 3 books. So let's start with the first book. So tell us more about that journey to want to write a book.
Yeah, I never really wanted to be a writer. Like, I don't know, writing is fine, whatever it is. I actually remember in 10th grade, I made probably a perfect 100 in my English class. And I was really struggling. I didn't know if I was a good student or not. In homeschool, we didn't get grades. And I went into, and this is a Mississippi public school. And I did well, but it was kind of very much like I kind of learned the rules and regurgitated it. And I wanted to take AP English the next year. And my English teacher, Miss Morgan, told me that I couldn't. She wouldn't sign the form for me because I wasn't a good writer. Miss Morgan, if you're still alive. Anyway, I probably am still trying to prove her wrong, sadly. I think a lot of us who become overachievers, it derives from this place of like proving our worth and our value. And so, I often do question, like, why do I feel like I have to prove something to someone? And so that's always kind of a constant kind of imposter syndrome, or making sure that I feel valuable. But that was kind of like early ideas around writing. And so maybe I never felt like I was a strong writer from early kind of socialization or feedback. But really, my dissertation topic was on examining specifically LGBTQ Christian identified students. And so when I was in grad school, actually before I was in grad school, I was working at Northern Illinois University, and I knew I was going to apply to the doctoral program. And one of my old professors from a different university said, "Oh, my colleague and friend is the dean of the College of Education. You should go meet him. His name is Lemuel Watson." So I emailed him and said, "Hi, Lemuel, I'm new here. I would like to see if you have any research projects I could help you with as I'm preparing to apply to doctoral programs." He was like, "Sure, let's go meet." I went in there and he's like, "Okay, let's talk, blah, blah." And he was like, "I actually want to do this project on like gay Christians or something like that in universities." And like my stomach turned. Like, I was 25 years old. At this point, I had been socialized very much my whole life that was sinful. That was not something I wanted to do. And I had actually just begun my first kind of relationship with a man. And I was going through a lot of like challenging mental, emotional processing with it too. And that really scared me to have to do this research project. At the same time, I did not want to disappoint the dean because I was applying to this program. So I agreed to it, and begrudgingly went down this path of researching, reading every book or article I could find around intersections of Christianity and sexuality. And then I eventually started interviewing students who had that experience. By the end of my dissertation, I'd probably interviewed 30 students who all identified as Christian and LGBTQ identified. Wrote my dissertation, got my doctorate, got my job that I wanted. Your dissertation goes into ProQuest that no one ever reads. But I kept thinking about these students' stories and being like, they poured their heart out to me, their pain, their trauma, their resilience. What did they really get out of this? And so after about 2 months of me always thinking about these stories that I interviewed them about, I contacted my former advisor, Dr. Lemuel Watson, and said, Lemuel, I think I need to publish something. I need to do something with these stories. And he's like, oh, here's a couple of publishers. I'll help you write a manuscript, send it in. So I did. And really, for me, this was like honoring those stories, those voices, and making sure that our institutions could do better. And really, that was really the heart of what brought out that first book. And so I was fortunate that the book came pretty quickly because it was adapted from my dissertation. Also, it was the book that was written for like a common audience. It really wasn't an academic book. I didn't really have any desire to become a tenured faculty that I needed to publish and all these kind of things too. So I wrote it, I published it, I put it out there. It was very painful at the beginning. I was still kind of in my journey of like navigating my own spiritual identity, Christianity, relationship with my family. I never really had a big coming out story. I never was like, hey, parents, guess what? Like, that wasn't how I did this. I'm sure many folks know my parents my coming out was I mailed them this book. And in the book, as a qualitative researcher, I am the instrument. So I did a whole chapter on my experience and my lens and my perspective and how that influenced me as a researcher. Most of the book are other student stories. But that was kind of the journey with that. So that book came out at the end of 2012, so 10 years now. And I've published multiple books after that, but that book is still fills a void within our literature and knowledge base. And when I get invited to speak or when I talk to some random people here and there at conferences and even sometimes on the street, that's the book that people reference. And so I fully believe, my work and my career are connected to my purpose in life. And so I'm honored that I was able to contribute something that has changed people's lives.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's just remarkable, Joshua. I think, the courage, the role modeling, and I think just the fortitude you demonstrated. And again, thank you for being such an inspiration. So you went on to write your second book, Queer People of Color in Higher Education. How was this experience different from your first book?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is I had a much better healing process at this point too. And so, I mean, I remember writing the first book and I would be sitting at my kitchen table, transcribing the interviews that I had. So listening to the stories and typing and just bawling. It was very fresh in my own kind of experience and journey. And then I kind of was able to move to a place that I was able to hopefully have more experience and knowledge around really helping institutions shape what they should be. And so I was at UC Santa Barbara as the director of the LGBT Center. Fortunately, I think that I approached kind of social justice work from a racial justice lens, even before I did LGBTQ work. I think for me, I'm multiracial, Asian American and white American, growing up in a small town in Mississippi. My racial identity was very apparent to me from a young age, living in a bicultural family with a Korean immigrant mother and a white American father. Our ideas around race and ethnicity were obvious. So racial identity had always been kind of at the forefront of my head. But as I moved into LGBTQ spaces, it was very clear that those were very white-centric, Eurocentric spaces. I even remember one interview where I interviewed as the director of the LGBT Center, and I talked a lot around intersections of racial justice and racial identity and LGBTQ identity. And a white lesbian told me, I just wanted to make sure you know that most of our students are white. And I was like, this ain't the place for me. They didn't hire me and I didn't want to work there anyway. So as I approached my first full-time job as the director of an LGBT center, I did so with an intersectional lens, definitely centering QT BIPOC folks. I transitioned from there to the University of Wisconsin, where I was the assistant dean and director of the Multicultural Center. And in that role, I was now responsible for advocating and supporting all the BIPOC students at a very predominantly white institution. I met a close friend and colleague, Gabe Javier, and Gabe was the assistant dean and director of the LGBT Center, and he is queer identified and Filipino. And so we were having conversations around how do institutions do better to support by QTPOC folks? And we were like, oh my gosh, blah, 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 blah. And so we were like, someone should write a book on this. And they were like, oh, I think that's us. And so we were like, okay, the two of us, we're both at a large Research One institution. We have the knowledge and the experience to do this. We also co-led a program called Crossroads. And to my knowledge, University of Wisconsin is the only school that has a fully staffed QT BIPOC center. And it's co-led by the Multicultural Center and the LGBT Center. And so we had a very strong resource program to do that. We had promising practices. So we wrote that book, and that was super exciting to be able to do a book like that. That came out in 2017. It's already outdated, realistically. I'm glad that we've evolved and we've learned. Some things I read in my old writing, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. So if you critique my writing, that's very welcome. And I encourage you to update it and write new things that are pushing the envelope and expanding our knowledge and way of learning more with that as well.
Well, Joshua, I cannot even imagine writing one book, let alone two. And again, not just two, right? In your case, you just wrote a third, and it was just recently published. So let's talk about your third book and sort of this continuation of your passion and advocacy. So say more about your third book.
Yeah, and I think you'll see the pattern here. I don't write because I love writing. Writing doesn't bother me. I'm a very fast, tactical writer. I should need to practice being more of a creative, engaging writer. So the most recent book, Queer and Trans Advocacy in the Community College. So I transitioned to another job and eventually ended up being the Dean of Equity Programs at American River College, which is a large community college in Sacramento. And when I got there, I was fortunate to move into a space to where the institution was ready to start a Pride Center. Yet no one really knew what that meant at that institution. And one of the reasons I was probably hired was that I was a director of an LGBT center. And so with that, I was able to partner with the faculty coordinator, Dr. Emily Mitchell, and we were able to establish a Pride Center. At that point, I think that American River College was one of the top, first 11 or 12 community colleges in the country to have an LGBT center. And so this was not very common at the time. And so we were able to create a framework and a model to establish an LGBT center at a community college that proved to be effectively serving and building community and advocating for LGBTQ students in the community college setting, which can be very different than a 4-year setting as well. We felt good about it. We presented at ACA, the Association of California Community College Administrators, a couple of times. Jesse, that's probably where I met you, was at a presentation. And so we did this presentation a couple of times, really on how do you institutionalize LGBTQ work in the community college? And people were very excited about it. People kept asking us, can you help us do this at our college? Blah, blah, blah. Can you do this? Emily started doing lots of great advocacy work at the state chancellor's office. And from there, it was like, Emily, I think someone kind of needs to write something on how to do this at the community college. And then again, we looked at each other. It's like, I think that's us. And so at that point, there was very little writing and literature out there. We did it a little bit as a research project. We researched all of the institutions who already had LGBTQ programs in the community college, which I think was only about 15 or 16 institutions at the time. This was probably 2018. We started this research project, 18 or 19. And we asked them how did y'all do this? What were the challenges? What were the obstacles? What are the success stories? What's the advice you give? And so that's kind of what the book turned into, as really not something that's super research intensive. Really, the goal is if you want to try to create LGBTQ plus programming and support at your community college, here's a book to help you do that. So that just came out over the summer. And it's been super exciting to hear from folks who are able to use it. and to institutionalize it and to really have a guide for it as well. Coincidentally, around the same time, a group of folks were able to advocate and get some money from the state chancellor's office. So we were able to get $10 million from the California State Chancellor's office, and CCSF did get a chunk of that money as well. So I hope you're using it wisely to really advocate at the state level. And so this $10 million got dispersed to all 116 California community colleges. And I know a number of those institutions are using this book kind of to figure out like, okay, thank you, we got this money. What do we do with it now? And so I've been able to partner with a number of colleges and districts to really support them and guide them with implementing something that's sustainable, that truly is going to revolutionize their campuses and reform what we think is equity, what we think is identities, and better serve, definitely LGBTQ students, but with an intersectional lens.
Mhm. Well, Joshua, I think I just need to take a moment to tell the audience. So what Joshua has shared is that he wrote a book with his co-author, Emily Mitchell, on practices that colleges should be implementing in order to better serve, queer and trans students, especially at the community college level. So Joshua is the person who is, saying, hey, folks, you might want to consider doing X, Y, and Z. So again, you're talking to somebody who absolutely is doing this to transform lives. So Joshua, I just really want to just acknowledge that. And again, I think it's amazing that you again took on, this work. So Joshua, what most people don't know is that as a result of your work and collaboration with Emily, the state LGBTQIA plus summit, right, became a thing. So can you say more about this summit and what it's about and sort of where it's heading?
Yeah, and so as kind of named, most community colleges, California community college system is probably the most far along when we talk about LGBTQ activism. Still, we have miles and miles to go. But with that, the California community college system has a summit. I think we're in the year 4 or 5. And realistically, kind of give kudos to our founding parental roles, Nancy Jean Tubbs, who has been the director of the LGBT Center at UC Riverside for probably, 20 years or so. When I was the director at UCSB as a newer director, she had already been there for 10, 15 years and was kind of a mentor to many of us younger folks entering that field. She definitely sees a need and fills a void. So actually the CCC Summit came from someone in the UC system. And she was just like, we're going to do something. And so she really set the foundation for it. And really, it's been the last couple of years where the community college has built up enough leadership to take it on. So Dr. Emily Mitchell, who I talked about, who was the Pride coordinator at ARC, is now a dean of instruction at Cosumnes River College. She had been the chair for the last couple of years, and I've been on the planning committee for it as well. Whenever the pandemic happened, we all kind of were like, what do we do with conferences and gathering and community and advocacy? And so we pivoted to it being an online summit. And there were a lot of perks that came out of that. During that beginning, we had almost 1,000 people register from across the state, and even some people outside of California who they don't have access to things like this in Nebraska or Missouri or Maryland. And so they were able to join a remote conference with that as well. And so it's continued to grow. And so this year it's going to be online for the first part of it. And I think that's April the 19th, I believe. That'll be online portion. And then we're doing our first meetup in person since the pandemic. And so College of San Mateo, my home campus, we're hosting the Northern California Regional on May the 12th. So please come hang out with us here. So all of y'all get your gathering. Y'all are 30 minutes away. So please come down, hang out with us in the little suburban hills. We're going to have a good old time learning some things, advocating at the state level, probably have a little drag show, whatever it is. It's going to be a good time.
May 12th.
I might even be performing in drag. Who knows?
And I've seen Joshua in drag. Joshua looks beautiful, stunning.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a minorly paid drag queen as well. My favorite thing lately is I got to do some speaking engagement and do drag as well. So I did Pride panel for CUNA Mutual, a Midwestern insurance company out of Wisconsin. So I got to do a drag performance and then do a little kind of lecture on gender identity expression within the workplace. So that's kind of fun to me. I'm not the greatest drag queen ever, but I have fun with it. And I'll continue to get better.
So Josh, we'll move on to the next question. So again, your first book was published 10 years ago. Hopefully 10 years, the needle has shifted. What do you see LGBTQIA advocacy going in the next 5-10 years? What do you see this movement? I certainly hope it gets better, but I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of what would we need to do as a state, as a community, as a nation?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about social movements and specifically LGBTQ movement, the louder and more powerful it gets, the more resistance that comes with it as well. And so when you think about in the last couple of years, much of society has been much more open to LGBTQ community members. They're learning more. It's become even to this point to where it's tokenized, it's commercialized, so that is good and bad in its own way. And as it becomes a little bit more mainstream supported, there's also a lot more resistance. And so when you look about all of the more recent kind of anti-trans laws and bills that have passed across the country, those weren't really bills before, also because people weren't demanding rights. And so the more that marginalized communities start saying like, y'all, we are here, we're not going to be quiet, we're not going to be submissive, and we're demanding rights, the oppositional parties will kind of come back with more resistance, more violence, and more hatred with all of that too. And so I think that that's sadly where we are right now, is we're at this point where there's a lot of great things that are happening, and there's a lot of really scary things that are happening with that too. And so I would say to be prepared that, I don't want to use kind of violent terms, but this is a fight. And this fight is sadly kind of just getting into its kind of most kind of conflicting part with it as well. And so we're going to see probably some sad moments in the next handful of years around the ways in which people come at LGBTQ folks, thinking around rural communities. Where I come from in Mississippi, most of the people who were queer trans identified did not come out, or they left that state and that community. And so my home state of Mississippi, I definitely have a level of fear when I go back home. All my family's there. Gender identity and sexual orientation are not included in hate crime laws. And so if I am hate crimed because of my gender expression or sexual orientation, it's not considered a hate crime. And realistically, almost every time I go home to visit, there's an incident that is a threat or mocking or hate speech or sometimes even violence. And so that's the reality that I think about when I try to go see my family. But at the same time, in those spaces, there's a pride in my hometown in Mississippi now. They do a pride festival. There's a nonprofit that's focused on LGBTQ advocacy in Gulfport, Mississippi. They do drag brunches now in Mississippi. So wow. You're seeing kind of both of these things happening at the same time. And so I would say overall, we're making progress, but it's also really scary in a lot of times, in a lot of places. And my family regularly is like, are you ever going to move back down to the South and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I like human rights. And the reality is, as much as I would love to be like, I'm brave and I'm going to be a social justice warrior and move home and start a nonprofit and a shelter for trans kids who've been kicked out of their homes. I don't know. I'm being selfish right now in my life. And like, I am happy living in San Francisco is the first time I've ever lived in a city. And it's kind of nice to be like, I can go out and I can wear whatever I want to wear. And I'm not always scared about who's going to attack me. And so I don't know. I kind of have these thoughts regularly that I would love to go back home to Mississippi and be a part of the revolution. But I don't know. I'm not there yet. And so it's conflicting. I don't know. Yeah. I've had a lot of students in my social justice spaces who are like, I want to be a radical grassroots social justice activist. I'm like, where are you looking for jobs? They're like, San Francisco or New York. I'm like, oh, y'all. I mean, no shame to them. Like, being safe and having rights is still important with it too. But I don't know, I have a lot of those kind of thoughts going on around where I should be and what I should be doing. And all those kind of narratives that I just told are all very US centric. I've lived in other parts of the world that it's really scary. I've experienced violent hate crimes in another part of the country, and I couldn't even call the police because then I would go to jail for telling them why I was hate crimed. And so, looking at our little bubble, so knowing that we're the City College of San Francisco, I ask that we don't take for granted the rights that we have, the culture that we live in. And by no means is San Francisco or CCSF perfect in any way, but in perspective, there's a lot of other parts of our country and our world that people are still being killed or imprisoned because of their gender and sexuality.
So Joshua, thank you for sharing your narratives and stories. And then certainly you are in a very, pivotal role now as the Vice President of Student Services at College of San Mateo. So how are you supporting your team? How are you supporting students? How are you supporting your community? Because again, as a Vice President, you now have greater influence to shape and change some of the things that needs to be changed.
Yeah, and I think that that's a wonderful part. I'm glad that I'm at a table where I'm able to help influence decisions. I think that the more higher up I move as an administrator, the more I realize how much limited power I actually have. I'm like, I thought I would have more power at this point. Realistically, I'm trying to play the long game with this as well. And so, there's always like levels of collusion where we compromise. And I try to be very cognizant of, am I colluding for the long game or am I colluding for self-interest? And I hope that I always keep it on the top of my head around like, I want long-term change. And if I come out guns a-blazing radical, I won't be long-term sustainable in this role as well. And so making sure I'm pushing the needle for progress without going so wild that I get pushed out really fast as well. And that's not specific to CSM. That's kind of in this field, not just in higher education, in corporate America, in government, in nonprofit, that really we're not challenging one institution or one system. This is institutionalized and this is societal. So I think that that's kind of where I am with it now. I mean, a number of things that I think about. I was right before this, I was finishing an interview to hire our first Pride coordinator. And so that's something I'm super excited about, to get a paid staff member to do LGBTQ work at this institution. So that's something that I'm excited about. We're hosting the California Community College LGBTQ Summit. I also am partnering with Coast Pride, which is the LGBT community center out of Half Moon Bay. So Half Moon Bay is in my college service area, and that part of the county is pretty rural, and they have very few resources and spaces for queer and trans identified folks, especially those who might be migrant workers. And so we're partnering with them to do our first queer pride, our queer prom. And so we're doing a LGBTQ prom for local high school students who maybe don't feel safe to be out at their own high school proms, as well as kind of a second chance prom for all of our students here at CSM who maybe didn't have the best experience with prom because of their gender or sexuality. We haven't picked the date yet, but y'all are welcome to come down too and have a little party with us. And so we can make this a regional kind of prom. So that's something I'm super excited about. I'm also on the Half Moon Bay Pride Committee. And so this will be Half Moon Bay's first Pride ever. So planning that to really advocate for it as well. So definitely a lot of those things. And then a policy perspective, I'm the Title IX coordinator, which addresses sex and gender-based violence. Historically, when we've talked about Title IX, it's really been based off of sex and mostly focused on female folks, which is real and needs to happen as well. Legislation has changed in the last few years that also includes gender identity, sexual orientation, and gender expression. Most institutions have not updated their policies or training to really understand if someone is discriminated on based off of their trans identity, queer identity, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual identities, that's also included in Title IX. So that's a policy perspective that I'm working on updating and educating my college campus on that as well. And so policy, culture, community, really working to advocate for all of those pieces at the institution. And then I think something that seems subtle and little is just showing up authentically as me, which has been a challenge. I've often been kind of one of the youngest administrators in spaces. You can't tell, or maybe you can tell, I'm pretty small in my demeanor. I like fashion a lot. I'm also Asian American, which often folks feminize, devalue, and remove power from. So I have all these kind of layered identities that people assume you're not a good leader because you're small, because you're Asian, because you're queer, because you're feminine, because you're young. And those are things that I've tried to understand and articulate my whole life and show up authentically me without trying to show up in what leadership means as a white, straight, cis, patriarchal, hyper-masculine idea of leadership. And so as I moved into this role, even when I was applying and interviewing for this role, I was like, I'm kind of at the point in my life where, like, if I never move into another leadership position, I don't really want to if I don't get to be me. So I came to this interview with my jewelry on, my makeup on, my high heels on, and I was like, you take me or you leave me, I don't really care. And they embraced it and they supported me. And so I've been intentional about showing up to work, wearing things that feel like they're me, that's very gender non-conforming, and not feeling like I have to apologize for it as well. And so the number of students and employees who have gone out of their way to, one, affirm my identity and role at this institution, but also acknowledge that that created a space for them that they felt like that they could be authentic to themselves too, has been another way that, like, I just kind of have decided I was going to show up and be who I am in this space with it as well. And with that, I mean, there definitely have been some incidents where people have said, you know, hurtful things or problematic things regarding my gender expression or sexual orientation. And luckily, I'm at a place to where I feel like I have protection around positionality. So I think that there's that level of two, where probably the more stable I feel in other parts of my identity, with like growing up poor, but not being poor now, being a student versus being a vice president, I feel like I can be bolder in my marginalized identities where I didn't feel like I always had that level of protection that I've had in the past. And so hopefully I continue to push that to be me, to be hopefully a visible role model for that as well. And then even when I think around like what it means if I want to continue down this path in higher education, I went to this conference a few years ago that was for people who wanted to be presidents of institutions of higher education who were LGBTQ identified. I'm not 100% sure if I want to be a president. I probably will pursue that path at this point, but I'm not sure. But when I think about it, I don't know if I've ever seen a president of a college who is gender nonconforming. So when I went to this conference, all of the presidents were white, and all of the presidents were gender conforming, meaning that they were a man and they were masculine, or they were a woman and they were probably something. Actually, a lot of the women were masculine as well, but to the level of like this idea that like, can you be trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming and be taken seriously in a leadership position? And sadly, when I think about role models, I know that I'm trying to be a role model to my students and employees here, yet I've never seen anyone who looks like me and lives like me in a position of power, anything higher than I'm in. Even vice president wise, I don't even know if I know many folks but there as well. So it definitely can be isolating. Not that I need to or want to be kind of the trailblazer. I hope there are other people who do this far more than I do as well.
Well, Joshua, there's no doubt you've been trailblazing for years now. So again, I just so appreciate you stepping into that space and you know, trailblaze, you know, and just make it so that others, right, will reap the benefits of all the work and all the stuff that you've been doing. And I really see a fourth book coming. It might be something around policy, culture, and community.
Jesse, we'll co-author that one together.
So I want to be respectful of time. One last question for me, and then we're going to shift to Tony to start facilitating the Q&A. So one last question, you know, to ask you, Joshua. What would be some 3 leadership advice for students on this call? What do you want them to take away in terms of how to be authentic, courageous, bold? What would you say to them?
Did you say 3? I need to give 3 tips?
Yeah, I would ask for 10.
But... Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best leadership characteristics that I don't think is often talked about in old school leadership theory. And so one is leadership is a field of study. It's not just something that you're born into or you are a good leader, whatever this is. Leadership is a skill set that can be developed. And so I would say if you want to be in a leadership role, if you want to have levels of influence and power, you need to put the work into it. And so one of the first things I did, I became the president of the Residence Hall Association when I was a sophomore. And a lot of my executive team members were juniors and seniors and multiple years older than me. And I was kind of terrified. I was like, how did I get selected for this position? And so all summer I read these leadership books. And I really learned a lot from them. And then so as I continued down that pathway, and so investing in that. But one thing I will note from a lot of these leadership books that I was reading from like the early 2000s, they didn't really talk about anything with like emotional intelligence. And so I would say invest into understanding emotional intelligence, because when you understand your emotions and other people's emotions and how to interact with them, to me, that's one of the strongest leadership characteristics and skill sets that you can actually do. And so, of course, probably the most popular person who writes about this right now is Brene Brown. You know, I know that every middle-aged white woman loves Brene Brown, and I will like sign up to be in that camp too. And so she does some fantastic work. And so if that's the first thing that you can do, dive into it, understand people, what motivates people, and really how to navigate conflict. I think that's tip number one. Really work on your emotional intelligence skills. That will go a long way. I think the second part of that is really understanding identity. I think when people talk about leadership outside of the context of identity, they're only seeing half the picture. And so when we talk about, you know, identity, I'm talking about race, gender, class, ability, sexuality, religion, all of those things. Social power comes along with positional power. They're not in separate spaces with that as well. So find ways to understand how identity, leadership, management intersect. Because if you are a leader or a manager and you're leading and managing everybody as if they have the same identity, you're probably not doing a very good job. And so really understanding that, connected to that, understanding your own identity and what positionality comes with that as well. Since a lot of my work has been within social justice spaces, most of the time the people I'm supervising are women of color. And so although I identify as a multiracial person of color, I identify as someone gender nonconforming and feminine, I am still a male person. I still have proximity to whiteness, and those influence how I lead. And if I'm not cognizant of those identities that I hold as I'm supervising and leading a bunch of women of color, I'm probably not going to be very good at it. And so that's kind of the second thing that I would think about it as well. And then the third thing, and this is where probably a lot of leadership stuff talks about, is really building up kind of your organizational skill set. So take project management courses, understand like you have a vision and you have a goal and you know how to work with people. You have to have some level of skill set around like, how do I get from point A to point B without stepping on everybody, without squashing an organization? Like you have to have a vision, but you have to know how to implement it within a specific context along with other people. Realistically, when it comes to doing specifically equity and justice work, if it was me all by myself, I will move stuff so fast. We will have a plan. We will have everything done in 2 days. But realistically, if I don't involve other people with it, if there's not a process, if there's not collaboration, context, healing, community building in it, that plan is going to be garbage. And so really understanding all of those elements within like emotional intelligence, identity, and having a tactical skill set around organizational change and transformation. To me, those are three things that I have worked on, and I've seen it be effective in actually changing an institution. And speaking specifically around shifting organizations with an equity and justice lens, those things are really hard to come by, all three of those. So when I started my consulting company, PMJ Consulting, along with my partner, Emily Prieto, so she's a vice president at another institution, and she and I both were doing equity and justice work. And we were trying to find consultants to help us create an institutional equity plan. I couldn't find anybody to do that. And so I kind of did my own research, came up with my own rubric framework, and really guided that process. And really that was what was helpful for me, is I had the equity and social justice knowledge, theory, and skill set. And I also had a strong organizational and administrative skill set to combine together. Because oftentimes, if you only have an organizational project management skill set, you're only going to go so far around equity and justice work. If you have to have a lot of theoretical knowledge around social justice, but not this transformational organizational skills, it's going to be really hard to implement to actually see results with it as well. And so that's where I've seen my skill set and leadership be most effective, with really transforming organizations with both of those skill sets combined.
Well, you have a lot of skill sets, Joshua. Thank you for providing a summary. You are an amazing person. I am just so inspired by you. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. I will turn it over to Tony, who is going to ask you questions from the audience. So Tony, thank you so much again for facilitating again. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Anthony Sharon. I go by Tony, and I'm a senator on the Downtown Associated Student Council and also an ASL student at the CSF. So thank you, Vice Chancellor Lee, for inviting Joshua today. And thank you, Joshua, for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your stories and experiences with us. We have learned so much from you today. And I see that there are several questions from the audience. And if you have questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat to Amy, who's helping with our Q&A. And for the next 20 or so minutes, I will be facilitating this Q&A portion. So I think we're ready to get started. Is it okay, Joshua?
Let's go. Happy to chat with y'all.
Okay, that's great. So first question. You are so active and energetic. Where do you get your energy from?
I drink a lot of coffee. I don't know. Kind of going back, like, even this is kind of funny. When I'm not at work, sadly, I talk about the same things. Most of my friends are people who do similar work. I think like Jesse and I will like go grab happy hour and we probably talk about the same things. And I think it's fun, right, Jesse? So I feel fortunate that and even when people are like, oh, when I think about now, when I watch TV, most of the TV shows that I watch have very social justice focused themes with them as well. And so kind of some of the colleges have gone down this path when they ask in a performance evaluation, tell me what you've done to further your understanding of equity and social justice. Realistically, most of the TV shows I watch, I'm learning around different identities, or I'm healing my own experiences and identities by seeing positive representation of me and my communities. So even in my free time, this is kind of what I do, and I have fun doing this as well. And so for me, this isn't work. This is just kind of who I am, what I do, and I'm passionate about this type of work, whether it's there or not. So I do get energy from having conversations like this with all of y'all. And so I will probably leave here feeling happy and excited and continuing my night. So I think most of my energy just comes from this is what I love to do and to talk about with it as well. Other things, I say coffee, I do drink a lot of coffee, but within many spaces, especially social justice spaces, self-care and wellness is critical. I have so many friends who did kind of social justice work, and it's hard. Most of us moved into that work because we were traumatized in some parts of our life. And sometimes there's a lot of unhealed spaces with that as well. And so I think one of the things that I've thought about when I moved into my first full-time job that was based off of equity and identity, everybody who've ever had a job or worked, when you get it, you're going to get into a conflict at work. That's just how work is. You're going to disagree with someone at work. When you disagree with someone around work that's related to your identity, your community, trauma that you've experienced, it hurts in a really different way. And so there have been times where I think it's really important that we pay attention to what we need as individual leaders and activists, and to make space for that as well. So all that's to say, I have developed pretty comprehensive wellness self-care routines. And so I'm regularly physically active because that's how I feel like I relieve stress. That's how I process. That's how I balance wellness. So I do typically run, exercise, yoga, weightlifting, Pilates 4 or 5 times a week. And that's helpful to me to kind of process. I take a lot of baths, just laying in the bath and like processing with that as well. I am still involved with church communities. And so although I love and hate them in many ways too, I critique them. I also gain a lot of spiritual centering and meditation from Christian-centric spaces. And so that's important to me around connecting to purpose and spirituality. So I think all of those things helps me to keep going and to stay focused on what I'm doing with it as well. That's kind of the basics around, I'm thinking around like how I've sustained passion and energy. And, you know, there've been times where I've chose to leave full-time equity and social justice roles because I could tell I was getting emotionally worn down, that I wasn't in a healthy space to keep on doing this kind of work, or that I was becoming numb. You know, I think that when you're working with students who've experienced trauma and you start to feel like, I've heard all this before, everyone's experienced this before, that's a really scary thought to have. And I think when people get to that place, they probably need to take a break and pause and reflect. Because when you start to feel like the trauma that our students experience, students who are like unhoused or experienced hate or bias incidents, and we act like it's normal parts of society, that's scary. And I think that those people probably don't need to be in those roles where they're student facing in those moments as well, because they will, when a student shares something that's really hard and painful, that person could re-traumatize or neglect the feelings that they might be needing support with.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing your energetic tips. By the way, we got a lot of energy from you today too. Okay, question number 2. You've been very successful in different industries. Can you tell us how to keep a balance when you are doing several things at once and how to do them well at the same time?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to go back to, I do feel like I've been successful in the things that I've pursued. One thing is I don't pursue things I'm not good at. And so there's been a number, like when I was in high school, I was probably pretty good at math and science. And, I think people kind of were like, oh, in the kind of, communities I grew up in, I grew up pretty poor and I knew I did not want to be poor anymore. And so with that, it was like, I'm good at math and science. I'm going to pursue engineering, pre-med, whatever it is, to have kind of a guarantee that I'm not going to be poor. And I started down that path and I did okay. I made A's in my math and science classes, of course. I didn't really love it. I did it because I needed to do it. I definitely had to study way more in math and science classes, versus when I did stuff around like creative marketing, business, social sciences, education, it came very naturally to me. Like I already had a huge passion for it and it came pretty natural to me. So when you're thinking around what success means, I think about and I was a career counselor too. So here's my career counselor hat coming out, y'all. Pick something that you're naturally pretty good at. Pick something that you also love to do, and then do it so well someone pays you to do it. And I think that that's something that I have done is I found something I was naturally pretty good at, and I love it, and I'll do it for free. And I put the effort into building the skills and the knowledge that I did it so well, people pay me to do it at the same time. And so I think with that has really helped me be successful. Balance, I don't know. Some people might say I don't have good balance because when I'm not at work, I'm thinking about work or talking about work, but I do enjoy it at the same time too. So I have very blurry lines of work-life balance, but I feel totally comfortable and fine with that as well. And so that's kind of the ideal when you're thinking around for our students, what career path you want to go down. If you can align those things, it's just, yeah. And so it's like, okay, I could have been probably a pretty mediocre medical doctor. I would have had to probably study a lot more. I'm pretty sure I could have gotten to med school and graduated. but would I have loved it? Would I have been super successful? Probably not. Versus going into something around social justice and education, it never really feels like work. And, I get paid enough to feel comfortable in the life that I want to live. And it's fun. So.
Thanks so much for the answer. Okay, next question. Can you please tell us what topics you think need to be included in laws in order to help the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, laws for sure. I think the hard part for me is it's hard to mandate equity and justice. And so we see that there's laws on the books like Title IX, which was a law that's focused on sex discrimination in education. That really did not, there's still many, many women, specifically women and female and femme folks who were sexually assaulted on their college campuses. So Title IX did not eliminate or change that as well. And so law is definitely one element of change. Of course, education is another large part of it as well. I chose to go into education because I believe education is more transformative than just laws. Of course, we need all of them with it too. But as far as laws go, I'm going to use some kind of pretty simple ones. We have some things around kind of, in California is pretty good in comparison to other places with that too. But a lot of our kind of employment laws, there are things on the books that says it doesn't really, that it protects people from discrimination in the workplace based off of gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. Yet, I don't even know if those are enforced. I don't know if they're monitored. There's also another statewide policy, the Assembly Bill 620, which requires all community colleges to have an officer that really should be educating and addressing anti-LGBTQ discrimination. Yet I don't know if anybody actually monitors, regulates, or hold institutions accountable for that. So I think that California specifically, there are a lot of good laws on the books, but many times people don't know them and people don't enforce them, and there's no consequences to them. So I think that for California, we need to elevate these laws and we need to create systems that hold people accountable for them as well. That's kind of, I think, where we are. Nationally, many other laws that are still up there. I mean, fortunately, it just got signed that same-sex marriage is protected now more permanently, because up until now, like that could change based off of what the Supreme Court could decide with that too. And so marriage is there. When it comes to some things around housing discrimination, largely around this the country, people can still be kicked out of their homes for being queer or trans identified. So if your landlord finds out that you're trans and they evict you, you have very little protection. And I think, I don't know, it changes regularly and quickly. It's still like 30-something states in the country, you have no protection with housing based off of LGBTQ identity. So there are many things, but I think going back to basic needs like healthcare and housing and food and employment, there are still many parts of our country that have no laws or protection for trans folks mostly, but definitely based off like queer, gay, lesbian folks with that as well. That's kind of another large part. I'm not a legal person. I should be better with legal and policy pieces with it too. So I'm probably not the best person to speak on those, but those are definitely a couple that quickly come to mind that I think that we should be focusing on. But realistically, I think some of the laws around like that's going on in, I think it's Georgia, like the Don't Say Gay bill kind of things like that, where they're trying to prohibit and criminalize educating children around sexual and gender identity. That's a huge thing to really make sure that curriculum from even elementary school is inclusive around LGBTQ identity. Of course, many other identities around that too, but not only is it not included, but then some states are trying to ban it from being discussed as well. And that narrative is very similar. A lot of states are trying to ban critical race theory. Actually, I think there was a article even in California recently where there was an institution trying to ban critical race theory at one of the institutions in California too. So I'll stop there. I'm not the best at answering that question. So those are my thoughts. no one quote me on any of that.
Yeah, thanks so much. I absolutely agree with you. Okay, so and we have time to ask Joshua one more question. Yeah, and the question is, so what is your favorite ice cream flavor and why?
I'm gonna go back to
Sorry,
the.
we like this question a lot.
I love it. I'm gonna go back to the last question for one more thing that I thought around. I don't know if it's law or policy. Someone in like poli-sci, correct me if I'm telling your students the wrong information. Immigration policy, specifically around asylum seekers and LGBTQ identity, that is still, I mean, across the board, immigration policy needs a ton of work, but specifically with folks who are trying to immigrate to this country, because in large parts of the world, they will be killed or criminalized because of their LGBTQ identity. I think we definitely need some policy and legal reform around allowing folks coming from other countries to be able to come to the US in a lot easier way when they know that they'll be killed or in prison from their home countries for that as well. So I know that's a really heavy, scary one to think about, but I think I always try to keep a global lens that we are US centric, we are California, we are San Francisco, but there's so many global human rights issues that it's easy for us to not even think about sometimes as well. And I know we have a large kind of English language learner population on this call, so y'all probably do think about this a lot more than some of us who are domestic US people. But ice cream, okay, let's end on something fun, y'all. We're starting a holiday kind of weekend journey. One of the things that I do every time I go back to the South, I know I run my mouth about how awful the South is. At the same time, I love it, and it's kind of made me who I am. So it's definitely problematic and challenging. But when I go back to the South, one of the first things I do is I get Bluebell banana pudding ice cream. And so if you have been to the South, Texas, Florida, Mississippi, Georgia, Bluebell is a brand you can only buy in the Southeast, and they have a banana pudding ice cream that's also kind of rare for their flavor. So sometimes I have to go to 3 or 4 stores before I find it. And it's got the banana pudding chunks in it, and it's got vanilla wafers that are a little bit soggy in there too. Oh, it's good. So if you ever make it down south, get some Bluebell ice cream, and definitely the banana pudding one is good. I also make a pretty good banana pudding, but not ice cream. So maybe if I get to come to your May 5th thing, I'll bring y'all some banana pudding.
Let's make that happen. That'll be awesome. I'll be happy to help.
Thank you so much. I'm making notes. I definitely should try it. Okay, so okay, thank you so much, Joshua, for your interesting answers to the questions from our audience. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chloe, who will facilitate the next portion of our event.
Thank you, Tony, for facilitating the Q&A portion of our event. And thank you again, Joshua, for answering some more questions from the audience. We really appreciated you share helpful tips, lessons learned, and sage advice. I personally loved hearing about your experience. Especially, I'm impressed by your career journey. You do a lot of work to help students. I'm also a member of the Associated Student Council, so your speech inspired me a lot. My name is Chloe Lian, and I am a senator on the Downtown Associated Student Council and an ESL student at CCSF. Now I'm going to facilitate the last portion of our time together, which is to invite you to share what inspired you today and what you have learned from Geisce. So if you'd like to share, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom and I will call on you. And as we're waiting for the participants to gather their thoughts, I'd like to invite my fellow facilitators to share what they have learned. Marilani, would you like to share your takeaways?
Yes, thank you. Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for this chat here. You're so energetic, and I think one of the takeaways that I got from today was that you knew you wanted to work with students. You knew you wanted to do some kind of PhD work, you didn't want to do, focus on publications or teaching, and you found a path to be able to take that and work with students and not having to teach. So I think that was very innovative. Getting your PhD, but not having to be, just stationary as a professor or teacher. So that's what I took, being innovative with your degree and still being able to work with students. And I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to, I see hands.
Yeah. Thank you, Marina Lee, for your answer. And we see another student raise your hand, Tateno. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Should I address you, Dr. Johnson? I am very, very lucky to be here and be able to listen to you. And you really shared so much. And I personally support LGBT ever since, I don't know. I'm not trying to be a dark, but I'm sure you know this movie, Boys Don't Cry. It's based on a true story about Tina Blandon. And after I watched that movie, I mean, it really made me cry. And something like that never should happen. And then I really appreciate that, here in this world, somebody like you exists. And I think I'm gonna get your book. I know already that higher people are of color in higher education.
Yeah, bring it on May 5th and get an autograph.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see another hands. Hi, Tony. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I just want to again say thank you to Joshua for coming and sharing his amazing experience, and again to say thank you for your outstanding job for community colleges and for LGBTQ community. It's very important, and yeah, you're doing an amazing job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. So I would like to ask Joshua if you have any final leadership advice that you'd like to share.
No, I mean, I just want to thank all of you for being here, especially the administrators and staff, and definitely the students who put this together. I'm honored that y'all spent your Friday afternoon listening to me run my mouth. And so I appreciate y'all. I think that some of the things, the pieces of leadership, y'all are already doing it. And so I would say the other thing is, don't wait for a title or a position. Leadership is oftentimes very separate from a position or a title, and just being very clear that, like, if there's an area where you want to see change, put the work into it, question why you're doing it, making sure that it's not around kind of ego or power, that really authentically, what are you trying to do with that as well? The other thing is, like, create systems where there's people around you that will hold you accountable. And I think that especially as you continue on your journeys, I am sure y'all are going to go on to be great leaders, and often with that comes a lot of power, and making sure you have people around you who hold you accountable. I think about a number of people who are in leadership and powerful positions who make some really bad decisions, and my assumption is they probably didn't start out with that path of wanting to collude, compromise, and make poor decisions, but it's probably a slippery slope. So as you go down your journey, building leadership skills and positions, and when you're at that table to make a difference, to really make sure you're sticking true to your values and advocating for folks who don't have a seat at that table with it as well. So thank you all for spending time with me today. If I see y'all walking around the neighborhood, I'll say hi and wave. Please say hi back to me. And I look forward to further engaging with y'all's community at CCSF.
Well, Joshua, again, I just want to close by saying thank you. But again, I just want to acknowledge the 4 student facilitators, student trustee, Malinali, thank you so much. Timon, Tony, and Chloe, you guys did a great job. Again, Joshua, we love you. Thank you so much for being an inspiration. Thank you for writing, so much to educate us, educate others on again, just everything that we need to really move the needle in a positive direction for queer and trans and LGBT folks. That again, I think it's just good to just have something that people can reference. In terms of the next Fireside Chat, I just wrote in the chat a good friend of mine, Richard Cooper. He is a retired bank credit union CEO. He just retired. Again, if you want to know more about the banking system, credit union and financial investments, Richard is going to share a lot of good advice and insights about, again, what it's like to be in the banking credit union world. But again, that's going to be on January 27th. Happy holidays to every one of you. Stay safe, take good care. Again, may you find much joy this holiday season and every day. Joshua, thank you so much. I love you. You are just super awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Amy, I'll be right back. Mia, I'll be back.
Bye, everybody. You all can sign off. We actually have another different meeting.
Oh yeah, I was about to ask. Okay, I was not invited for the after party. Wait a minute.
If it was a party, Mayara, you'd be the life of it.
Okay, good to know. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for an amazing event, and it was amazing as always. You did a great job.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.
Well done.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's okay if you all want to head out. The leadership fireside chat is over. No need for anybody to stay.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
everybody can leave. Everybody
Okay,
can leave. Thank you.
okay, got it.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody. Mia, it looks like Jesse left. So I think he's going to send a different link
Oh,
by accident. Yeah. All right.
okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.